The night Oliver Harrington decided to lie about who he was, he was standing in his own ballroom, listening to a woman speak about him as if he were a piece of property. The chandeliers of Ravenscroft House glittered above rows of elegant guests. Music floated through the air. Silk gowns brushed against polished floors. Laughter echoed beneath painted ceilings. It was another grand evening in London society, another event where mothers pushed their daughters forward, and daughters smiled too sweetly at the 7th Duke of Ravenscroft. Oliver stood near a tall marble pillar, unnoticed for once. He had stepped aside for a moment of quiet when he heard Lady Penelope Ashworth speaking to her mother just behind the curtain that separated the ballroom from the terrace. "The Duke is certainly handsome enough," Lady Penelope said calmly. "Does, and his fortune is beyond question. I suppose I could tolerate his bookish habits if it means becoming a duchess. Once we are married, he can bury himself in his libraries, while I enjoy the position." Her mother nodded in approval. Oliver did not move. He did not speak. But something inside him shifted in a way that could never shift back. They were not speaking about a man. They were speaking about a title, about an estate, about power. Not about him. For years he had watched the same performance repeat itself. The careful smiles, the practiced laughter, the sudden admiration for his opinions. He had wanted to believe at least one of them saw the real Oliver beneath the title. But that night, hearing himself reduced to a convenience, something hardened inside his chest. 6 months later, the Duke of Ravenscroft vanished from London society. In his place appeared a gentleman named Mr. Oliver Harrington. No title, no fortune, no political power. Only himself. 3 months after that decision, Oliver stood in the ballroom of Ashford House, dressed not like a duke, but like a modest country gentleman. His coat was clean, but not new. His boots polished, but clearly worn. His cravat plain. There were no jeweled cufflinks, no family crest pinned to his chest. And for the first time in his life, no one hurried toward him. At 29, Oliver was still striking. Tall and lean, with intelligent hazel eyes and strong features that hinted at noble birth even when he tried to soften them. But without the announcement of his title, the room treated him differently. Lady Penelope, yet who once laughed too loudly at everything he said, barely glanced in his direction. Miss Charlotte Peyton, who once claimed she adored his thoughts on poetry, turned away the moment she learned he had no great estate behind his name. Miss Sarah Whitmore, whom he had once believed kind, smiled politely until her mother whispered something into her ear. After that, she excused herself and did not return. 3 months of this. 3 months of polite rejection. 3 months of watching interest disappear the moment they understood he had little to offer. He had wanted proof. Now he had it. And yet, instead of satisfaction, he felt something colder. Loneliness. That evening at Ashford House, Oliver stood near the terrace doors, debating whether to end this foolish experiment. Perhaps he had been unfair, but perhaps no woman would willingly choose uncertainty when security was available. Then he saw her. She was standing alone near the open doors, watching the dancers with a small, thoughtful smile. She was not the most beautiful woman in the room. Others glittered brighter. Others wore finer gowns. Her dress was simple, the fabric good, but not extravagant. A strand of pearls rested at her throat, slightly dull with age. Her chestnut hair was arranged neatly, not fashionably dramatic, but soft and graceful. What caught his attention was not her appearance, it was her expression. She looked content, not calculating, not searching, simply observing. "Miss Grace Whitfield," came a voice beside him. Oliver turned to find his friend, Lord James Peyton, following his gaze. A charming girl, James added lightly. Daughter of a country vicar. No fortune to speak of. Here as companion to her cousin, Miss Whitmore. Sweet enough, I suppose, but hardly a brilliant match. Oliver's jaw tightened. What makes you say that? He asked calmly. James shrugged. No connections, no dowry, no advantage. What gentleman would look twice at a woman with nothing but herself to offer? Nothing but herself. Oliver felt something stir inside him. Perhaps that was exactly what mattered. I would like to meet her, Oliver said. James blinked. Whatever for? Conversation, Oliver replied simply. Without waiting for further comment, he crossed the room toward the terrace. As he approached, something unexpected happened. He felt nervous. When he was known as the Duke, he never felt uncertainty. Women welcomed his attention eagerly. Doors opened before him. But now he was simply Mr. Harrington, and she might refuse him. Miss Whitfield, he said gently, bowing. My name is Oliver Harrington. Might I have the pleasure of your company for a few moments? She turned toward him, surprised. Up close, her brown eyes were warm and intelligent. When she smiled, her entire face brightened in a way that felt genuine, not practiced. Mr. Harrington, she replied with a graceful curtsy. I would be delighted, though I must warn you, I am not much of a dancer. I was hoping for conversation, he said. Perhaps on the terrace. The ballroom is rather warm. That sounds lovely. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The music softened behind them. Moonlight touched the gardens in silver. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Are you enjoying the evening? Oliver asked, and Grace gave a small laugh. Very much, though perhaps not in the way most people expect. How so? I find these gatherings fascinating. The dances within the dances, the way people maneuver for attention. It is almost more complex than the waltz itself. Oliver smiled. You observe rather than participate. In many ways, yes, she admitted. I am here as companion to my cousin. It allows me to watch without pressure. There is a certain freedom in that. You have no interest in marriage? He asked carefully. Oh, I have interest, she said with amusement. I am simply realistic. I have no fortune, no influential family, no extraordinary beauty. The gentlemen here seek advantages. I cannot offer them. There was no bitterness in her voice, only honesty. So instead, she continued, I enjoy the music, the company, and the books I read during the day, the long walks near my father's parish. Life is full of small joys, if one looks closely. Oliver studied her face. She was not pretending. She had accepted her place without resentment. And what brings you happiness, Miss Whitfield? He asked. She considered. Kindness, she said softly. Honesty, treating people with dignity regardless of who they are. I believe character matters more than wealth or birth, though society may disagree. Oliver felt his breath catch slightly. Character matters more than wealth. If only she knew who stood before her. And you, Mr. Harrington? She asked gently. What do you value? He hesitated. How could he speak of honesty while living a lie? I believe, he said slowly, that people should be valued for who they are, not what they possess. Oh, and that true connection is rarer than gold. She looked at him more closely then. That is a beautiful thought, she said. They spoke for nearly an hour, about books, about human nature, about how society rewards appearances over substance. She listened when he spoke, not to flatter him, not to impress him. She listened because she was interested, and when she challenged his opinions, she did so kindly, thoughtfully. For the first time in months, Oliver forgot about his experiment. He forgot about titles and wealth. He was simply a man speaking to a woman who saw him. When she finally said she must return to her cousin, he felt reluctant. "Miss Whitfield," he began, "would you allow me to call on you? I have enjoyed our conversation greatly." She looked uncertain. "I am not in a position to entertain suitors," she said carefully. "My circumstances are modest." "I am not seeking advantage," he replied truthfully. "Only friendship, conversation, shared walks, nothing more complicated than that." She studied his face. Then she smiled. "I would like that very much." As they re-entered the ballroom, Oliver felt something unfamiliar. Hope. For the first time since beginning his deception, he wondered if he had finally found what he had been searching for. Someone who valued character. Someone who had nothing to gain. Someone who chose him when he appeared to have nothing at all. But beneath that hope lay a shadow. If she ever learned the truth, would she see his deception as protection? Or as betrayal? He did not yet know that the choice he had made months ago would soon test not only her heart, but his own. And the price of pretending to be poor would be far greater than he had imagined. The morning after the ball at Ashford House, Oliver woke before sunrise. He had not slept much, not because of regret, not because of doubt, but because, for the first time in many months, he was eager for something. He stood by the small window of his modest rented room and looked out at the quiet London street. The room was simple: a narrow bed, a wooden desk, a worn carpet. No grand portraits, and no servants waiting outside his door. Only silence. For most of his life, he had woken beneath painted ceilings in Ravenscroft House, surrounded by luxury that felt more like duty than comfort. But now, in this small boarding house, he felt more alive than he had in years. At precisely 2 o'clock that afternoon, he stood at the door of the Whitmore residence in Grosvenor Square. The house was elegant, but not extravagant. Comfortable. Respectable. A butler opened the door and looked at him carefully, measuring his worth in a single glance. "Mr. Oliver Harrington, to see Miss Grace Whitfield," Oliver said calmly, handing over his card. He was shown into a drawing room filled with soft light and simple furnishings. Nothing excessive, nothing showy. A moment later, Grace entered. Yet she wore a pale blue morning dress that suited her perfectly. Her hair was neatly arranged, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Harrington," she said with a warm smile. "How kind of you to call." "The pleasure is entirely mine," he replied. They sat at a proper distance from one another, yet the space between them felt smaller than the room itself. "How are you finding London?" she asked. "It moves faster than the countryside," he said carefully. "But I find it easier to bear when I have good company." She laughed softly. "I fear I offer little excitement." "You offer something far better," he said without thinking. She tilted her head. "And what might that be?" "Honesty." She looked at him for a long moment, almost searching his face. "Honesty is often undervalued," she said quietly. Especially here." They spoke for over an hour. She told him about her father's small parish in the countryside, about teaching children to read, about walking along quiet fields at sunset. He listened with genuine interest. No one had ever spoken to him so freely about simple joys, without trying to impress him. "You are very different from most gentlemen I have met," she said at last. "In what way?" "Most feel the need to boast, to display accomplishments. You seem content to simply speak." He felt a strange sting of guilt. If only she knew how much he was hiding. Over the next weeks, he called often. They walked in Hyde Park beneath blooming trees. They attended public lectures together. They discussed books in quiet corners of tea rooms. Grace never once asked about his finances, never once hinted at future security, and she seemed happy simply to be with him. And slowly, friendship deepened into something neither of them named. One afternoon, seated beside the Serpentine, Grace watched children sailing small toy boats on the water. "I find myself thinking about our conversations long after they end," she said quietly. Oliver's heart pounded. "So do I," he admitted. She turned to him, her expression serious. "I value your opinion, Mr. Harrington, more than I should." He swallowed. "Grace," he said, using her given name for the first time, "what if someone you cared about had not told you everything about themselves?" She looked surprised. "That is a curious question." "Hypothetically," he added quickly. She thought carefully. "If the deception was meant to harm me, I would not forgive it," she said. "But if it came from fear or insecurity, I would try to understand, though it would hurt." Her answer both comforted and troubled him. He was falling in love with her, and she was beginning to fall in love with him. But their entire foundation rested on a lie. The crisis came suddenly. Grace's cousin Sarah announced her engagement to a wealthy baronet. The house buzzed with excitement. But when Oliver found Grace alone in the garden, her smile did not reach her eyes. "You are not happy," he said softly. "I am happy for Sarah," she replied. "But once she is married, I must return to my father's parish. My time in London will end." The words struck him like a blow. She would leave, and he would lose her, unless he told her the truth. He could not let her leave believing he was a modest gentleman with limited means, and that would be the cruelest deception of all. "Grace," he said, his voice unsteady, "there is something you must know." She looked at him carefully. "You sound serious." "I have not been entirely honest about my circumstances." Her face paled slightly. "What do you mean?" "My name is Oliver Harrington. That part is true. But I am not a country gentleman." Silence stretched between them. "Then who are you?" she asked quietly. He forced himself to meet her eyes. "I am Oliver Harrington, the 7th Duke of Ravenscroft." The world seemed to freeze. She stared at him as if she did not recognize the man before her. "You are a duke," she whispered. "Yes. And you have been pretending to be poor." "Yes." She stepped back as if distance might protect her. Why?" "Because I was tired of being loved for my title and fortune," he said desperately. "Because I wanted to know if someone could care for me for who I am." "And you thought lying to me was the way to achieve that?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone with hurt. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," she said. Tears filled her eyes. "I trusted you. I spoke openly about my fears, about my limited prospects, all while you stood there, knowing you held wealth and power beyond anything I imagined." "I love you," he said suddenly. "Everything I feel is real." She shook her head. "How can I believe that? If you could lie about something so large, what else might be false?" "Nothing," he said fiercely. "My feelings were never false." "But the foundation was," she replied softly. Yet the pain in her voice cut deeper than anger ever could. "I need time," she said. "Please leave me." He wanted to argue, to explain, but he saw that she needed space. "I will go," he said quietly, "but know that I love you." He walked away from her in the garden, feeling as though he had destroyed the very thing he sought to protect. For the first time. Bonchine High, his wealth felt like a burden instead of a blessing. Back at Ravenscroft House, surrounded by luxury once more, he felt emptier than ever. He had wanted proof of genuine affection, and when he found it, he risked losing it through deception. Days passed. He respected her request. but each hour without her felt heavier than the last. He wrote and tore up letters. He walked through grand halls that now seemed hollow. He wondered whether love built on truth could survive a beginning built on lies. And he feared that the simplest woman he had ever met might also be the one who slipped from his life forever. The week after Oliver confessed the truth was the longest week of his life. Ravenscroft House stood as grand and powerful as ever, its tall windows shining over Mayfair, its halls filled with portraits of ancestors who had carried the ducal name for generations. But to Oliver, it felt empty. Servants moved quietly through polished corridors. Important letters waited on his desk. Invitations arrived daily. He ignored most of them. What he had faced political opposition in the House of Lords without fear. He had managed vast estates without hesitation. But he had never felt so uncertain as he did now. Because this time, his heart was at stake. Across London, in a small bedroom at the Whitmore residence, Grace sat by the window with folded hands, trying to steady her thoughts. She had believed she knew Oliver. She had trusted him. She had fallen in love with him. And yet, he had hidden the most important truth about himself. The hurt was real, but so was the love. That was what made it unbearable. If she had discovered he was cruel, she could have walked away easily. But he was not cruel. He was kind, thoughtful, gentle. He had listened to her dreams, respected her opinions, treated her as an equal. Those things had been real. The title had been hidden. The man had not. 3 days later, Oliver could bear the silence no longer. He sat at his grand mahogany desk and began to write. Not as a duke, not as a powerful man accustomed to command, but as a man asking for forgiveness. He told her he had ended the masquerade completely. He told her his feelings had never been false. He admitted that he had been wrong. That fear had guided him, that he had tried to protect his heart, and instead wounded hers. He did not beg. He did not demand. He only promised honesty for the rest of his life. When Grace received the letter, her hands trembled. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Tears blurred the ink. He had not defended himself. He had not blamed her. He had simply taken responsibility. That mattered. She thought about their walks in Hyde Park, about the way he listened when she spoke, about how he treated servants with the same respect he offered noblemen. She realized something important. The man she loved was not created by wealth. He had shown her his true character long before revealing his title. The deception had been wrong, but his heart had been honest. The next morning, Grace made a decision. She wrote a short note requesting a meeting at Ravenscroft House. The reply came within the hour. That afternoon, she stood before the grand entrance of the Duke's London residence. The building was magnificent. Tall columns, carved stone, guards at the gate. It represented everything she had once believed separated them. But when the door opened, Oliver himself stood there. No servants announcing him, no pride, only hope and fear in his eyes. Miss Whitfield, he said quietly. She stepped inside. He led her not to a grand hall, but to a smaller sitting room lined with books, a room that felt personal, honest. They sat facing one another. I was wrong, he said immediately. There is no excuse. She nodded. Yes, you were. He accepted that without argument. But I have also been thinking, she continued. You were not cruel. You were afraid. He looked up at her. I was terrified, he admitted. Terrified that no one would ever love me without my title. And so you tested me, she said softly. Yes. Silence lingered. Then Grace took a steady breath. "I will not pretend it did not hurt," she said. "It did, deeply. But I have also realized that the man I fell in love with was real. Your kindness was real. Your respect was real. That your values were real." He rose slowly and stepped closer. "And if I promise you complete honesty from this moment forward." She met his gaze. "Then I am willing to try again." The relief that crossed his face was almost painful to witness. "Grace," he whispered. "I love you," she said, her voice trembling but certain. "Not your title, not your estates. You." Emotion broke through his composure. He took her hands gently. "I love you," he said, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of your trust." Forgiveness did not erase the past, but it gave them a future. 3 weeks later, Oliver formally proposed. Not as Mr. Harrington, not as a man hiding, but as the Duke of Ravenscroft, standing proudly and honestly before her. He knelt in the Whitmore drawing room. "Grace Whitfield," he said, his voice steady, "will you marry me and stand beside me as my partner in all things?" She did not hesitate. "Yes." News of their engagement spread through London quickly. Whispers filled drawing rooms. Some called it romantic, others called it foolish. "How could a duke marry a vicar's daughter?" society asked. Oliver did not care. He had chosen character over convenience. Grace faced the gossip with quiet strength. She had not sought a title. She had chosen a man. They decided to marry in her father's small countryside church. Many expected a grand cathedral ceremony. Instead, the wedding was simple. Grace walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk, modest and elegant. Oliver watched her with awe. She was not overwhelmed by the grandeur of his world. She walked toward him with calm certainty. Her father performed the ceremony. Villagers filled the pews alongside noblemen. Wealth and simplicity shared the same space. When they exchanged vows, their voices were strong. "For richer or poorer," the Reverend said. They both smiled softly at that. They had already lived both. After the ceremony, the celebration took place in the garden beneath blooming trees. There were no excessive displays, only laughter, only joy. Oliver stood beside his new wife as the sun dipped low. "You chose me when you believed I had nothing," he said quietly. "I chose your heart," she replied, "and I will never hide it from you again." Their marriage became the subject of stories across London. The Duke who pretended to be poor, the simple woman who chose him anyway. But beyond gossip and romance, their love was built on something stronger. Truth, forgiveness, that partnership. Grace became more than a duchess. She became Oliver's equal in every decision. Together, they funded schools for girls who could not afford education. Together, they improved conditions on his estates. Together, they proved that love is not measured in gold. It is measured in character. The Duke who once hid behind a false name learned that true wealth is found in being known completely and loved anyway. And the simplest woman in the ballroom showed London that sometimes the one with the least to offer in fortune holds the greatest treasure of all. Their story was not about a title. It was about trust and the courage to choose love when it would have been easier to walk away.